There is no place in the world free from scary stories. Wherever you travel to, there are tales of ghosts and demons, monsters that live beyond the boundaries of our world that come to terrorize. But you don't need to travel to hear every scary story, for the rhetoric of horror travels just as much as we do. For decades, cinema has been a powerful medium to deliver these stories to people around the world. And for decades, these stories have been passed from place to place, being resituated in different contexts, expressing different fears based on where the story goes. In this video, I will talk about how the rhetoric of horror travels from Japan to the United States, and how the two rhetorics differ. Ancient tales of vengeful ghosts have existed long in the history of Japan, influencing modern horror, which passed beyond Japan and across the Pacific, weaving its way into Hollywood and American theaters everywhere. Horror's road of travel is not one way. This cross-cultural exchange goes two ways and brought influence from both cultures into each other. Now, let's start early in the 1950s. According to Ruth Goldberg, we can trace back a popular understanding of Japanese horror film to the 50s, when Godzilla rampaged through cities and ghosts haunted moviegoers. But to take it even further back, many of these scary stories were present in Japan as early as the Edo period in the 1600s. J. McRoy says that the kaidan stories, or weird tales, involve female spirits that have been wronged in life and come back to the world of the living to exact revenge. As Xing Lu says, Confucianism is a staying in your lane type rhetoric. Valerie Wee points out that kaidan stories entail the consequences of breaking Confucian-dictated gender roles and straying from that lane. Japanese theater also housed horror. Shunen revenge and shuromono ghost plays were part of no theater, and kaidan was performed in kabuki theater. Katarzyna Marok explains that these tales were extremely popular in the Edo period. People would get together in Hyakumonogatari Kaidan Kai, where people would tell scary stories in turns until 100 stories had been told, in order for something supernatural to happen. All kinds of people would attend these events, who felt that kaidan offered escape and satire. As Scott Stroud claims, texts are multisemic. They function differently across different contexts. In modern Japan, these old stories have been used once again in cinema. By examining the 1998 Japanese horror film Ringu, a retelling of a kaidan vengeful ghost story, and comparing it to its 2002 Hollywood remake, The Ring, we can see how the rhetoric of horror crosses between cultures, and we can see what is lost and what is gained in that movement. Susan Stanford Friedman writes that the gap between the original and translation of a text can reveal shared and unshared aspects of culture. What many film theorists argue is that Ringu reflects social anxieties over changing family values. Valerie Wee points out that much J-horror, starting around the 90s, focuses on the dysfunctional family. She says that, quote, many of these films tie family collapse to larger socio-cultural changes linked to modernity, women's rights, the loss of a traditional identity grounded in communal and the familiar, heightened stresses rooted in consumerism, unrestrained economic ambitions, and the failure to build and nurture familial relationships, unquote. Wee ties this notion directly to Ringu. This is where I believe I can expand upon Wee's point to say that the anxiety over the breakdown of traditional family values reflected in Ringu can be explained through visual rhetoric, and the absence of such anxiety in the American remake can be explained through visual rhetoric as well. These visual arguments, as Harriman defines them, are not just support for language-based arguments, but images that argue themselves and make contributions to deliberation. In Ringu, Reiko returns home after discovering a link between teenager deaths and the cursed video for her story. Her son Yoichi sits alone in the apartment and gets up when Reiko arrives. He is already dressed up and has prepared Reiko's clothes for her in a reversal of child and parent. Reiko moves in an L shape, directly avoiding Yoichi and heading into her room, into where Yoichi follows her and helps her with her dress, while asking about death. As Ruth Goldberg points out, in contrast to the multi-generational Japanese household of tradition, Reiko and Yoichi live alone together in a very unemotional environment where Yoichi, even though he is only 6 years old, has to take care of himself. In the next scene, Reiko parts from Yoichi once again to pursue the story, leaving Yoichi in the care of a few old men. As his mother walks away, he turns his head to the picture of his dead friend Tomoko, who was killed by the videotape. The distance the mother takes allows Yoichi once again to contemplate death. Unattended, Yoichi starts to explore the house alone, into the dark rooms where Tomoko was found dead. Yoichi is coming ever closer to death and visually darkness, without his mom's guidance. Reiko finds him in Tomoko's room and leads him back away, when she receives a business call and sends Yoichi ahead. Reiko goes downstairs to interview some of Tomoko's classmates, but Yoichi doesn't appear in the scene again. Later on, Reiko calls on her ex-husband and father to Yoichi for help. On Yoichi's way to school, he sees his father standing in front of him. They look at each other, and Yoichi walks away without saying anything. A moment of recognition, but no relationship or connection. After that, there is a long time where we don't see Yoichi, but there is a random scene inserted between the investigation where Yoichi is walking by himself and turns his back at the camera like he is looking at something. In this moment, we can see how isolated Yoichi is from his mother at this point and the narrative, and as he turns back, we recognize the danger that is being foretold coming to him. Later on, Reiko and Yoichi are staying at their grandparents' house. Reiko comes home to Yoichi asleep on the floor in front of the TV, which takes up almost a fourth of the frame, just waiting in anticipation to strike at Yoichi. As a last act of parental protection, she picks him up and puts him to bed, then leaves to call her ex-husband. Later that night, Yoichi watches the tape, and Reiko fails to save him. In contrast to the Ring's Aiden, Yoichi's American counterpart, Yoichi is a helpless young boy neglected by his mother. Aiden, however, is coded as a strange and unusual boy from the beginning. In the first scene, we see Aiden drawing pictures of his dead cousin Katie, and has been doing that, as it turns out, even before Katie died. Visually, Rachel, Reiko's American counterpart, pays much more attention and gives more affection to her son than Reiko does in Ringu. Although Aiden is being drawn to death, similar to Yoichi, the relationship between mother and son has little to do with this. Aiden comes off as a very sharp, individual young kid who isn't necessarily in need of guidance.
You wish I was around more?
No. You want to be around more?
Rachel and I were...
Young. Mom's told me that story.
The moment we see Reiko and Ryuji, the ex-husband, we know everything we need to know about their relationship through visuals. Before he can ring the doorbell, Ryuji comes face to face with his ex-wife as she opens the door. They both stare at each other blankly for a moment, before Ryuji ducks his head and walks in. No words, not even a smile. This sets the tone for the cold relationship between these two characters and exemplifies the absence of any sign of familial relationship between the two. When they finally sit down inside, their body language exhibits these same notions. The way Ryuji leans and holds his head concerned. The way Reiko sits stiffly and stares downwards in avoidance. She can't look at him when she hands him the camera, and he can't look at her when he gives her the picture. Later, after analyzing the video together, somebody walks into Ryuji's apartment, to which Reiko gives a surprised look. From her point of view, we see Takano, Ryuji's student, enter the room, although she is coded to be a little more than a student to Ryuji. Reiko and Takano exchange a minimal, awkward greeting. The reality sets in that this is Ryuji's new lover, as she sets down a bag of groceries, symbolically taking the place of Reiko as Ryuji's wife. Takano has a short, playful exchange with Ryuji, more suggestive than any previous interaction between Reiko and Ryuji. Reiko is visibly upset by Takano, and Ryuji is embarrassed by her. We see her alone afterwards. Takano looks like she's pulling a prank on Ryuji by erasing part of his formula on the blackboard. Takano is coded as the more deviant, more sexual, and as the last part shows, less beneficial love interest of Ryuji. She's pulling a prank on the least humorous character in the movie. In this way, straying from his traditional marriage has brought about this more casual, unserious relationship. Finally, nearing the end, Reiko takes Ryuji's place and descends into the well to find the body of Sadako, the vengeful spirit of the girl who was killed by her own father, the same girl who haunts the videotape. Ryuko finds her body underneath the swampy well water, pulling back her hair to uncover the skeleton. She embraces the dead girl like a child of her own, while Ryuji exclaims they are saved. Ironically, Ryuji is the one who dies later because he didn't copy the videotape, but also his failure to find the child in the well as a symbolic failure as a parent. The conflict of husband and wife isn't present in the American version. The father character, Noah, is introduced in a similar scene to Ringu, which mainly serves as a nod to the original, because right after it cuts to Noah and Rachel sitting casually in her apartment talking. Noah is more friendly and normal to Rachel in general, and there isn't a conflict like in Ringu. They have flirty moments and argumentative moments, but it comes out as more playful and not as a reflection of a deeper theme. By the end, they are still not technically in a relationship, but it is implied that they are satisfied with each other and that they might get back together right before Noah dies. So, what does this all have to do with Japanese horror rhetorics? In the beginning, I talked about kaidan and old stories from Japan that Ringu is based off of. I analyzed how changing family values are expressed through this old text in modern Japan, and how that text traveled even further to America, where the kaidan was translated and Hollywoodified. I argued that visual rhetoric is one of the many ways to dissect these texts and see how they reflect cultural rhetorics. This is only a glimpse into the world of traveling rhetoric. There is so much more to see and uncover. And wherever there's rhetoric, of course, there will always be scary stories.